Hey, Tim.
How are you, Merv?
I I am beyond relaxed. I don't know if I told you this, but my family and I are up in Pagosa Springs for a little vacation time for the weekend, and we just came back from a wonderful walk, a wonderful little hike up to the Piedro Falls. It was a
Oh,
beautiful day, gorgeous day. So I am enthusiastic, and I'm especially enthused about today's topic.
yes, yes. We were going to cover emotional intelligence. Again, we were going to go into details of emotional intelligence, right?
Correct.
So,
That's
so here, let me kick it off here real quickly. Um, so one of the things that we look at with emotional intelligence is basically how do I become more aware of myself and my relationships? Let me give you a little story here. um, when I was a budding project manager, I was working in a transport business, basically a box mover, right? They move boxes across the country through planes and trains and big trucks, and then they move boxes inside city. And we were actually helping them improve their technology. And I was working with the individual groups, the centers, and we have probably about 7 or 9 centers here in New Mexico. Now, some of them are here central to Albuquerque and to Santa Fe, but most of them. The rest of them are spread out throughout the state, and they're very remote. And I was one of the 5 people who are going out to upgrade the different centers. And I went out there, and being a young budding project manager, I knew this had to be on time within budget, and we had to do it within a certain window. And so I was ready to go in and just plow through the work. And I expected these people to want me to do it the same. Well, I was breaking out the material and I was pushing hard. And these guys were just sitting back watching me and eating donuts. And I was thinking, how dare they do that, you know? And it was funny because actually, um, they they were of a mind that this was so important that they were willing to push out their work in order to have me happen. And so it was a real strange push and pull. And it wasn't until, I was halfway through the work, I started asking questions. If I would have started with just saying, what do you need? And how can we fit this into your day? We could have had this conversation done early. I totally misread the situation. But luckily, these guys were smart and mature enough to catch me before I made a serious fall.
So they helped you in they were emotionally intelligently aware, and they helped you in your early years to become more so yourself, right? Is
Yeah,
that what
they
you said? Yeah.
yeah, they in my words, they patted me on the head and made sure I didn't make any big mistakes.
Well, and that's great. Sometimes we need those mentor-like figures in our professional lives to help us get through that sort of thing. I
Oh,
went back and I listened to our first podcast, and I felt that we had broken kind of the shell of our discussion for emotional intelligence. But today, I think I want to spend a little, as you mentioned earlier, to get a little deeper into it. But you had a good definition, if I recall, of emotional intelligence. And maybe if we use that definition, that would be a good starting point for us today. For the
yeah,
rest.
it really is. It really is. The capacity to be aware of, control, and express your emotions, right? I don't blow up in public. I understand my triggers and my behaviors, my perceptions, and I'm able to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. Okay. And we'll talk about empathy a little bit, but I carefully understand my relationships and how I relate to others. Now, this is something fascinating, and I'd like your input on this. The definition doesn't talk about others. It only talks about yourself. What do you think about that?
I think that's exactly right. I think that's where we have to start, is with ourselves, because if we don't know ourselves, I'm not sure how we can relate to those around us. First of all, we don't see how people are perceiving us if we don't perceive ourselves correctly. That's one thing. And then secondly, how do we perceive others in their natural state on a project or in the work environment? And you and I have kind of talked about keeping these conversations much more related to project management. But I don't see how you could have these kinds of abilities to progress and perform in your career without understanding others and without, first of all, working on yourself.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It doesn't work. In fact, we'll talk about this later, but if you're not able to control yourself and be able to use your emotional intelligence on yourself, one of the things that makes us a leader is people want to follow us. It's that trust we build. And if they don't see us doing that and demonstrating emotional intelligence, how are they going to even start trusting us? We can't expect that.
Well, and I go back to your opening story where you were a young project manager, and if you and I started roughly the same time in our project management careers, I would say it this way: if anybody who's listening to us, particularly I suspect on this side of the pond, as they say in the U.S. or in Canada, who has watched the series Mad Men, I think in some ways my career started at the end of where Mad Men kind of talked about, where it was very autocratic. You did what the boss says, regardless. The boss didn't have to have emotional intelligence. The boss just said, do, and you jumped. And I think part of what your opening story may have been part of what I also experienced, is that coming off the cusp of those kinds of autocratic management processes, it was hard for us to learn a lot of emotional intelligence because we were told we didn't have to. I don't know. What was your experience? Was it similar?
Exactly. We were looking at laws and rules, but we weren't looking at the culture.
Right.
We were looking at the organizational requirements, but we weren't looking at the relationships and and the give and take that just underlies how a business does its work.
Well, and you and I have talked about this before. I think some of, back then it was the wild, wild west of project management. And I think some of where we started off was we just said, we as an industry, we said, if we just put process in place, then we can make a lot of these wild west things. We can kind of make them all go in a single order, in a single fashion, and we can improve our performance. And I think we made some incremental improvements. But I think, and this is part of my premise, as part of people, as part of my stress on people, is that we missed it somewhere along the line in not focusing on our emotional intelligence and how we relate to others.
Yes, you're exactly right. And this may be an area of exploration that we can pursue in later shows. Frankly, it's fascinating. And Gartner talks about this too. This is the evolution, not just of a human being, but it's the evolution of business and commerce. It's like you want to set down real firm process early on so that everybody can get an identical result, right? That's your quality assurance. That's your precision. And you want to get that. And that only happens through rules and order, through command and control. But as that is established, then you have a little bit of variation that you realize can actually help with your accuracy. And then with that precision, that repeatability, that accuracy means you have accuracy constantly. So I think they go hand in hand. I think that process is good to a point, but process without relationship doesn't allow us any growth or exploration or innovation, whether it's within ourselves or business.
Well, and I think that's where I was going. You said it much easier, much more clear with clarity than I did. But the point I think I was getting to was in the early years, we tried to everything to make process work, but as you said, we left out that emotional intelligence, the relational component. And I was wondering, as we're going through this, what's been your experience in projects or in situations where you've seen a lack of emotional intelligence?
Oh, it's I've had about 12, 15 crash and burns myself. And I've been part of major projects too. I've been a finance and business analyst for other project managers, and I've experienced the same thing. When process overcomes the results, things go sideways. That's where things get south. When process becomes more important, it's like quality, you know, when QA becomes more important than the deliverable, you know you're investing in the wrong part of the project. And so it's only through our relationships and our give and take in communication, as well as understanding and perception, that we can come to a fine balance before we make mistakes.
Well, and as I was doing some reading, and I recall somebody saying something along these lines that life goes much easier, and I'll say project life goes much easier when it's predictable and controllable. And I think that's where we try to impose process to make things predictable and controllable. But as you and I both know, projects are not predictable and controllable at all times. And
And
therefore, go ahead.
yeah, and that's where it really gets goofy. And what if your project starts off being totally in unknown waters, and you've never done this, like again, Apollo 13, the project of how are we going to get these astronauts down from a spaceship that is leaking air right now. You know, how do you do that in a certain order? You're not going to do a lot of planning there, are you? So how do we get these projects going?
Well, and I think the other part of that is, and if I can just kind of continue with that process, what happens, especially, and I know this has been true in my particular career, especially in the early days, is stress begins to build up because you can't control. You can't control sometimes yourself, but you certainly can't control others in many situations. And so when that stress begins to build up, it sort of escalates, and it's almost, it creates an avalanche upon itself. And the projects end up, instead of being righted, they end up going further off course. And so I think as we continue to talk about this, I think it's the emotional intelligence that brings that balance back, where we can control the stress. Maybe we can't control every situation, but in controlling the stress in some of the circumstances around us, I think then that's where we begin to sort of add a little bit of calmness, a little bit of order, a little bit of relationship, gather around the flag, folks, let's make this work. And I think from that perspective, that's where it really helps. I know in my later years, that's certainly where it helped me.
Yeah, that's the old Marcus Aurelius that says, I cannot control nature, but I can act in harmony with it. Even when things are out of control, I can be in harmony with that out of control in such a way that I can manage it that to the best of my ability and the best of our collective ability. And sometimes that's the best you can do.
Well, and part of that too is recognizing, not just in yourself, but recognizing in others, right? So the kinds of traits of people who are, and I'll call them low EQ, emotional quotient, or low in terms of their emotional intelligence. And if you can recognize some of those traits, I think it's easier to handle that way as well.
You know, let's dig into that. That's curious. There are 5 different components or traits of emotional intelligence. Let's go through them, but let's go through them a little differently. Let's look at them from a high EQ standpoint and
Ah,
also see what it looks like from a low EQ standpoint. And let's talk through them and see what they look like. First of all, let's rattle through them. There's self-awareness, being aware of you as a self. There's self-regulation. There's motivation. There's empathy, and there's social skills. Okay. And all of those mixed together into the cake of capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions and handle interpersonal relationships. So let's talk about self-awareness. What does that really mean to you?
well, first of all, as I understand it, self-awareness is the least visible of the 5 components that you just talked about. And so there are those who are very self-aware that others around may not even be understanding of that self-awareness. But I think what it really comes down to is there's a comfort with yourself. There's an understanding that you know how to handle situations. There's a confidence in your abilities. And yet I think besides the fact that there's a confidence, it doesn't result in an overconfidence. In other words, I think a self-aware person is not only aware of where they do well, but I think they're also aware. Let me change that. I know they're also aware of their limitations.
Yes, yes. Think about this definition of self-awareness. I'm able to understand my perceptions, my opinions, triggers, and my behaviors, which means I know my boundaries, which means I know what's going to set me off, and I know where I'm dark and where I'm weak.
Well, and go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
No, I was going to say Daniel Goleman, who he's the first book I ever read on emotional intelligence was I think maybe we can call Daniel Goleman the father of EQ or EI. But he tells a story, and I think this relates directly to self-awareness. He tells a story of a manager who's a middle manager who says, "Man, I'm a get it done kind of guy. When I bark, they jump, and we just make it happen." But if you ask the people that worked for him on his team, they would say he's a bully, he's whatever, you know. And it came down to the fact that if things weren't being done, the manager blamed the team. But if things weren't getting done, the team would say, "No, he all he does is yell and bullies us all the time, and we don't care if it gets done on time or not." And so you can see that his lack of self-awareness became an obstacle, and that's a situation. I thought that was a very telling illustration from Mr. Goleman in terms of how it is that we need to practice self-awareness and really try it out on ourselves.
Oh yeah. And when I observed this when I started learning what self-awareness really was, and I started working on myself, I became hyper aware of others who either did this or did not do this, which was an incredible gift. And it really bothered me for a while too, to realize how many people are wandering around this world not self-aware.
Well, and the whole idea too is if you can, besides the fact that you are aware of self, you also have this ability to perceive emotions in others. And I've seen people who have used that to a advantage that was not very ethical, shall we say. So, for example, a boss who perceives fear in someone then uses that fear of someone to bully them. And I think, well, I know that we can't allow that sort of thing. We need to become self-aware to the point where not only are we aware of how we act in situations, we have to know how to handle those around us and help them not take advantage of them in those situations.
Right. Right. This is where persuasion goes into the space of manipulation and coercion. The same tools we use in persuasion can be used for the dark side of leadership. And you're right, they're effective. And so is emotional intelligence effective. It's a dangerous tool, though, once you start realizing, the mechanics of how people interact and function in the world around them.
So if I'm a project manager who is self-aware and using that for the good of the project, that is, I know how I act and I know like I'm sensing the emotions or the emotional state of my team around me to the good. I think the next component you had talked about was self-regulation. Now, how does that relate in this whole situation?
Self-regulation says that if I allow my limbic system, which is my back brain, to respond, I'm going to respond emotionally. How dare you? Why did you do that? That's wrong. And this barking and this movement forward without intellectualization is a natural response of a human. This kept us alive. This is our fight, flight, or freeze response, and it's directly hardwired into our emotions. However, we've developed this cerebral cortex that says, hold on a minute, you don't have all the information here. Slow down and drop in. Over 6,000 years of documented research and analysis have said, it's better if you allow this front rational mind to step in and not change the decision, but give it a little bit of context. You make better decisions.
Well, and not only that, is a lot of people see self-regulation as sort of stemming the tide of their emotions. But I don't think it means putting your emotions down or in the back burner. I think it means being able to express them at the right time in the right way. So it's not withholding them, because we are emotional creations or creatures as humans. We still need to express emotion, but I think it's a way of expressing appropriately. I think to me, that's what self-regulation means.
Yes. I've used emotions as a barometer. I've been in an argument with clients and I see two clients going at it, right? Like this. And it's fascinating. I had this a lot in healthcare when HIMSS was saying we need to convert to electronic medical records 100% within the next 2 years. And the engineers say, yeah, it ain't gonna happen. And the directors say, if we don't do that, we're going to be fined. And so it's like both sides care. And that's what emotions say. When your emotions are engaged, you care. And that's what you want.
Well, exactly. That's exactly what you want, especially in a project situation. I had earned the reputation over time, especially in my latter years, of being someone who was calm, cool, collected in any situation on a project. And what I did in this whole topic of self-regulation, what I was able to do was, most situations did not bother me, but every once in a while, something would happen and it would earn my ire. Not anger, but sternness. And I remember a couple of situations like that, people coming to my office after and they go, wow, I didn't know you could do that. You really made those people think. And
Yes.
so I think, the whole self-regulation, there's times that you need to express that, in my case, my example, sternness, because of the gravity of the situation. But you don't do it all the time, because if you continue to use that all the time, at some point, it's just like, oh, he's yelling again. I just said, ignore him, forget it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You use surgical devices, some of them with precision and some of them with force, and you use them specifically for a expected purpose. And that's what self-regulation says.
I've had the same barber for over 25 years. And I went to see him this last weekend. And as he was cutting my hair, he was telling me about his kids coming over and giving him a hard time for his birthday. He was celebrating his 80th birthday.
Wow.
But this man is spry. He's with it. He is mentally. I mean, he's just incredible. He's an incredible human being. And I kept thinking, this is self-regulated emotional intelligence, because he took all of their barbs in stride, applied his own self-deprecating humor, and just enjoyed the life out of his party, even though he was 80 years old. He's going to live another 20 years. I'm convinced of it, just because of that self-regulating, emotional intelligent attitude that he has.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Let's move on. How about motivation? Motivation is another one of those emotional intelligence components. How do you see that?
Well, you and I have talked about this before, that really we as people can't motivate another person. I think we can demotivate, but we can't really motivate another person. But I think what we can do, well, I know what we can do. I keep saying this, I think, and I know. I know what we can do is we can create the climate or the environment for our teams that they become self-motivating. And we've already talked about self-regulation and self-awareness. For a project manager to be self-aware is a project manager who is also aware of those around him, and therefore can create that environment that allows his team to truly grow in their careers and to make real headway on the projects. Your thoughts?
Yes, yes, and I agree with you completely. We can't really motivate others. What we can do is understand their needs, and we can influence behavior. If we have both those in place, we can help them connect, completing the work with fulfillment of their personal needs. And that's one of the major secrets that I learned in motivation. Some people just need a paycheck. Some people need to be up on stage and everybody applauds. Great, let's do it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Some people just need to be recognized. Maybe having a one-on-one in the cafeteria each week, and that's their only social interchange. And I've learned this under COVID the last 16 months. This is one of the most powerful ways to motivate people. Give them that social connection that they need. And you help people fulfill their personal needs through their work, and they're going to surprise you with their performance.
Well, and again, as a project manager, we tend to be logical, cerebral types. But I've seen this. The project manager who can show high energy, high performance, him or herself, that seems to rub off on the team, and they begin to show high performance, high energy. And it's amazing when you become action oriented and goal setting and set the need for achievement, people will truly follow, because what are you doing? You're all going towards a common goal.
Right. And
Yeah.
there's something very powerful in that we. Nobody gets left behind. That's a major line in a lot of these war movies for a reason. There's something really visceral about saying, guys, we're going to move as a group. We're going to succeed as a group. Without us together, this is going to fail. And I haven't understood this totally, but there is that sense of purpose, and it's not passion. It's not passion. There's a reason to do this, and it resonates inside all of us.
Yeah. And I think if the leader takes that approach, that he will be followed, because you are sensing. And here's what I've also noticed on projects. If I have a leader who is low in emotional intelligence and a situation comes up, it may go right by that person. It just may blow right past them. Whereas a person with a high emotional intelligence who is aware of things that are going around him or her will stop and say, wait a minute, I need to stop and take care of this. And it's amazing how they can perceive and take immediate action and handle that situation, whereby the person with low emotional intelligence, in their sort of demotivating state of mind, just brushes right by it and can exacerbate the problem as opposed to take care of it immediately. I don't know if you've ever witnessed that yourself.
Yes, 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 yes. Some of my greatest examples of leaders were severe introverts. And
Severe.
they didn't demonstrate, and they didn't expose this great emotional output. Well, of course they could. Janitors, I knew a couple janitors who were just sort of, I learned to watch this after about 10 years, and I didn't look at individuals when I entered the room. I sort of scanned the room like a person would scan the top of an ocean, and I was looking at the patterns of the waves, right? And sometimes these big waves were not big exposed waves, but were big waves under the water. And these came from people who didn't need to be recognized yet. Just by being who they were and how they interacted with other people had a huge influence on others.
Well, yeah, and you had mentioned when we started the conversation about motivation that some people just want a paycheck, some people want to be on stage, etc. I think the people who are the most motivating, and which is what I've tried to do, are people who are motivated by things other than money or prestige or power or those sorts of things. The people who, in my mind, are the most motivating on a project are those who see a higher purpose in what it is that they're doing, and they have a passion to fulfill that goal that they've set in front of them.
Yes, and there are two people that I've seen that the two classes of people that I've seen that have that level. Number one, somebody who sees something outside of who they are, right? They belong to some social group. They belong to some religious or spiritual path. They belong to something that says, there is something bigger than I am, and I need and I desire to support and help that grow. And those people put that ahead of themselves. Now, there's a second type of person. These people have gone through either a crisis or some type of trauma that forced them to look inside themselves and either build a social or moral compass for themselves. And these people are incredible. We find this in history, like Eisenhower. Eisenhower, when he was out in Europe, was very angry with some of his generals, but he knew that if he would lash out at them, whether it was public or private, it would hurt the bigger picture. And he, because of his life, was able to say, okay, I'm right in feeling this way, but I'm wrong in demonstrating this because it's going to hurt what I really believe in.
Well, let me take it even closer to home. How about you and me? You and I had good careers as project managers, working in various industries, various types of situations. In my own case, I retired from, and I don't want to say I'll retire. I retired from being on an airplane every week on a project site every single week. That's what I retired from. So I'm enjoying time with my family. I'm enjoying time with my grandchildren. But we're talking about what motivates us. You and I are doing this podcast. You and I write blogs. You and I do a lot of things, and they're not even necessarily bringing in paychecks. But there's something that motivates us that's within us, and particularly, and I know for myself, where this industry has treated me well. A 43-year career in IT as a project manager for much of that time. And I feel like I have to give back. And my motivation to do even these podcasts is because I feel that what I have learned by watching others, by making mistakes, by doing things correctly, that I have something I can pass on to the next generation of project managers to help them in their careers and to help them make good project decisions. I didn't mean to speak for you, Tim, but did I express your process as well that way?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I'll do a short version of myself. I could have very easily gone down a dark path because of the way corporate decisions were made and the way my business as an employee came to an end in 2012. But I took a lot of that frustration and anger and understanding, again, I was lucky because I had been forced into a situation before then to be, to have to grow emotionally aware as a project manager. So I took that and I doubled down on that. And I used my business acumen with that to actually, carve a direction for myself and find my purpose. And once I found my purpose a couple of years later, there was no stopping me. I knew once I had that purpose, I was going somewhere.
Plus, it sure beats putting your feet up and just eating bonbons and watching TV, right?
Oh dear. To wake up in the morning and say, I have 15 minutes of just pure exposure to the fact that I am alive and I get to do something more than I did yesterday. That statement alone gives me a reason to get out from under the covers every day.
Well, and let me offer this also with motivation. What I'm also sensing is it also motivates you to be able to create that environment for your students or for others to motivate them to do well in their career as project people, as project managers or delivery people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. When I do it for myself, other people sense that experience and also sense my confidence in that experience, which again, this is how you become a leader.
Well, and for those people who are watching us, they know, or who are listening to this podcast, they know as project managers, I don't know if I ever worked a 40-hour week. If I did, I was probably sick one or two of those days. Our work weeks tended to be 50, 60, and there was times I put in 100-hour work weeks. This is not an easy profession. And yet we are motivated by the goals that we set out for ourselves and the incredible accomplishments we have, not because of what we can do, but because of what our team can do, because we can create that environment to motivate them to hit that single goal. And to me, it's a fascinating, wonderful career to have done, even though we worked awfully, awfully hard during that entire time.
Yes, yes. It fulfills other needs than professional and economic in our lives. That's and I'm with you on that. Because it does that, we're both lucky and we get to grow in certain ways that not everybody has an opportunity to.
That's right. By the way, I'm going to insert something here that has nothing to do with our topic. You use the word luck. Someone once explained to me that luck, L-U-C-K, stands for laboring under correct knowledge. So as long as you and I have done that for our entire careers, we have indeed been lucky.
Yes, I agree with you.
So
Go ahead.
I was going to, I don't know if you want to change, but we've talked about self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation. I think, what did you mention? You mentioned empathy.
Empathy was the next one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. This actually is another double-sided sword because we want to understand others, but once we feel their feelings, we may get lost in their feelings. And this is where Mother Teresa says there is a boundary between empathy and compassion. And compassion says that I'm willing to sacrifice to carry your burdens. And that may not be what we need to do as leaders and managers. What we may be able to do is be able to understand and share the feelings of another without taking them on our shoulders.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, we talked before in terms of the self-awareness, where we're obviously aware of ourselves, but also that we become aware because of that of the emotions or the perceptions of those around us. I think this is where empathy also has a huge part of our own excuse me, personal emotional intelligence. And I can tell you, I am not a natural empathetic person. That is not my natural bent. But as a project manager, over time, I did learn that process. And I remember specifically probably my last 3 or 4 projects where I could go into a room, I could be in the middle of a meeting, and these hard charging project leads and people around me making some point here, making some point there. And I could perceive through the facial expression, through the tilt of a head, through a nervous, clearing of a throat or something. I could perceive something in someone where they were not agreeing, but were not wanting to speak up. And I literally have on many occasions stopped the meeting and said, Cheryl, or whoever you are, whoever the person was, I sense that you have something to say. Would you share it right now? And it's amazing how all of these other people were not even aware of it. But I had developed, and it is a developmental process. I developed a sense of empathy where I could watch a room and truly understand that someone was uncomfortable with what was happening and needed to express themselves.
Yes. I came from it from a different direction. When I was very young, it was discovered that I had a high artistic capability, and my best instrument was my voice. So I had lots and lots and lots of singing lessons. It's not just the technical components of singing, but the intellectual, emotional parts. And so I'd spend hours and days and weeks with my trainers and working over a song and looking at the emotional component of a song and how who wrote the song led the listener through the emotional patterns and down, and how understanding that allowed me to express the song in a totally different way and much deeper way than others did. And when I started becoming and feeling like a leader in a meeting, all of a sudden this came back to me. And I said, oh, this is just like music. These guys arguing are just like the clash of different parts of the song. And all I have to do is figure out how to balance all these in a certain way. And it's another language. That's all it is. Emotions are just another language if we can interpret them and we can learn to speak in them. Again, we can use it for better or worse, but we can actually lead to a very interesting musical tune.
But and we also talked just now about motivation. It's amazing to me how when you are empathetic towards another person and understand where they're coming from, or try to understand where they're coming from, you may not even understand the underlying emotions or trouble with that person. But just by being open to that emotion and recognizing it, not even having to put a title to it or a definition to it, just recognizing it, it's amazing how suddenly they, you mentioned earlier, they want to follow you. They do want to follow you. And they do, in fact, appreciate that and become motivated as a result of that to do something for the good of the project because you, as a project lead or as a project manager, were there for them.
Right, right. There's a book by Mark Goulston who, this is a wonderful book. It's called Talking to Crazy. And it's how to actually step inside of a culture or a group or an individual's experience and understanding their context, be able to actually interact with them successfully. And Mark actually goes into great detail, but it's real simple. It's you go into their territory. You can't expect them to go into your territory and do the interpretation. You, as a leader, have to go in and understand them first. And then through your interpretation, can you influence and motivate?
Well, and not only that, so many project managers, because we are trained to problem solve, you want to fix it. But sometimes things are not there for you to fix. Sometimes
Right.
there are things for you just to empathize. And sometimes that means sitting next to the person at their desk and shutting up.
Right,
just,
right.
just listening to them.
There are things I can change, and there are things I cannot change. And I cannot change people's attitude, perceptions, behaviors. I can give them a reason. I can give them all the tools and the space. I can influence them. I can give them that, but they have to do the work.
Have you ever been in a situation where, for example, you had someone who was maybe antagonistic towards your leadership or your leadership style? And because of your empathy, you were able to, over some time, turn that person around so that they are actually motivated by your actions and want to follow you?
Well, actually, twice. Okay. One was when I was a waiter at a restaurant. I was a head waiter, actually. I'd been there for about 3.5 years. And one of the door hosts had a big problem with me, and he'd never give me tables, and he'd be very frustrating to work with. But then, the general manager was observing us. He was wonderful. And he said, Tim, just try something. He didn't even, I didn't take this problem to my general manager. He just said, Tim, you know what? I see there's a little frustration there. Why don't you sit down and have a one-on-one with him and see what's going on? Don't try to give him any advice. Just listen to him. And I said, I did that, and I asked the host, where does this conflict come from? Why why is this happening? And he said, oh, I don't like you. Okay, that I can understand. I can work around you not liking me. That's fine. Once I understood that, everything clicked and my behavior changed. And then he settled down and he treated me like the rest. Now, there was a second one. Let's see here. I can't remember the second one.
Okay. Well, I'm just looking at our clock. Maybe you mentioned there was 5. What was the 5th one?
Oh, social skills.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that for a little bit.
Okay, this is where we communicate and interact with each other. So empathy is we understand and share the feelings, and social skills is where we communicate and do the interacting. It's the ability to create and hold ongoing relationships.
So let me ask you this. It's a chicken and egg question, but I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Does a high emotional intelligence result in good social skills, or do good social skills breed high emotional intelligence?
Oh boy. That's hard. I think it's
Or maybe it's a bit of both.
I think it's a bit of both.
Yeah.
And here's the problem. I look at emotional intelligence as the bread, and each one of these 5 things as the ingredients. And I believe that social skills and empathy work really well together. Social skills are the communication channel. That's where we engage and interact.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think you're right. And now that I've thought about my own question and with what you just said, I think the idea of a high emotional intelligence, because it's something we can work on and develop, we can strengthen over time. Part of that strengthening our emotional intelligence is strengthening our social skills. I think they do go hand in hand, but I think the starting point is developing that high emotional intelligence.
It's funny on the PMP exam, the project management professional exam. A lot of these questions can be answered correctly under two considerations. Number one, always analyze first.
Yeah.
Number two, am I a source of the issue? I always try to eliminate me as a causal factor in any issue. It's not that I'm self-deprecating. It's not that I think that I'm all powerful and I am the success or failure of the project. But a lot of times it's my perception, it's my behavior. I didn't do the analysis. I didn't, you know, engage the team in enough understanding of the requirements or the risk or something like that. And I want to eliminate that before I find any other causal factors.
Well, and that goes back that full circle. Didn't we start with self-awareness?
Mhm.
So it's full circle, right? And again, when we talk about, I think I mentioned the last, I'm not sure when it was, you and I talked about this before. Maybe it was the previous emotional intelligence conversation we had on the podcast. But science has told us that at some point our IQ stops, our ability to develop our intelligence quotient basically stops. But our ability to develop our emotional quotient, our emotional intelligence doesn't stop. We can continue to develop that.
Right, right. To give you an example of this, when I was about 45, I was still overwhelmed when I went into public and I had I went into a grocery store and I was receiving all of these emotions and feelings and I wasn't able to, you know, basically I was just awash at sea. Just, I couldn't focus whenever I went to the store because there was too much information coming in. I couldn't control it. And I read about a little old lady who explained how she overcame this. She said that she would walk into a room and she couldn't function because there was too much and she was trying to work with each individual. But then she said, all I had to do was don't look at the individuals, but look at the whole thing, like I said earlier in this show, as an ocean and see each individual as a ripple in that ocean. And then all of a sudden, um, it's easier to interact. When you look at the individual drops of the ocean, there's no way you're going to be comprehending. And that's to your experience with hundreds of people on a project.
So we've talked about emotional intelligence. We've talked about these 5 aspects of emotional intelligence. And from my perspective, we have collectively shared wisdom that works. And it works in a way that when you apply it on a project makes sense. But you and I had talked at one time, this goes back a ways, we talked about the fact that before we lead others, before we as project managers can lead a team well, we first of all must need to lead ourselves. Does this all play into this whole emotional intelligence game?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Before you can practice these skills, you have to sharpen your own sword. You have to be good at this yourself, or you're not going to be able to be in the territory of emotions and emotional responses and human behavior. You have to understand your own human behavior, or you're going to trip over your own opinions and triggers all the time.
So if I'm not self-aware, and I'm understanding now, having listened, I'm a project manager, having listened to this from these 2 wise individuals, and I realize that perhaps I'm not self-aware. Are there some things I can do to help increase my self-awareness?
Certainly. certainly. There are a lot of different frameworks and activities that you can do immediately. Let's take one. Let's take Peter Drucker, right? Managing yourself. He has 4 simple steps. Number 1, what are your most valuable strengths and weaknesses? Just do an inventory. Now, when I say valuable, I don't mean that you like to do them. I mean that you're really good and you can do them without thinking, and they provide a real positive result. And weaknesses are the things that will take you down or distract you or hurt you. Now, one thing that Peter says is you want to play to your strengths, right? Your weaknesses will never become strengths, but you need to understand what they are and be able to start to predict where you're going to go in your weaknesses. Number 2, how do you learn and work with others? Am I an individual contributor? Do I like to be in the middle of a group? What are your values? What am I willing to sacrifice in order to do something like what you and I were talking about? Am I able to sacrifice part of my salary to do this type of work? That's a value. And then finally, what work environment helps me contribute the most? Working from home, working in the middle of an office, working on an airplane, working in a collaborative, or working in a very confrontational. Understand, and nothing's wrong or right when it comes to human behavior here. It's not wrong or right. It's basically a starting point. And even if you answer these questions wrong, just the process of attempting to answer them will teach you.
Well, and the other thing, I like all of those. Drucker was clearly a wise man. You mentioned environment. Part of that environment, this goes back to a previous podcast, and I keep mentioning these previous podcasts that we did, but they all kind of tie together. And one of the ones we talked about was mentorship. And I know that sometimes self-awareness means I need to see myself as someone else sees me, and that needs to be a trusted advisor who's going to be constructively criticizing me. Criticism is one of those things that helps us. And as long as I can trust that person and get that constructive feedback, then I know that that person's interests in me to help me become self-aware are truly genuine. I belong to an organization called Toastmasters International, and it helps you with your developing your public speaking ability. Well, part of the ability to develop good public speaking habits is to get that immediate feedback. And that immediate feedback makes us aware. Did I say every second word? I wasn't aware of that, but my mentor, my feedback person told me that. So again, that self-awareness, besides those Drucker questions and the environment we put ourselves, again, coming back to bringing on a mentor, I think is so important. And that's the advice I would give any budding project manager, is to ask for help and ask for mentorship.
Oh, yeah. And again, if you really truly value that, you'll be willing to set aside your expectation or perception of being a great person. You're a person. You know, there's no pronoun to being a person. You're a person. You may perceive yourself as great or lowly, but no, we're all people. And on this path, on this growth, you're going to be better than you were today, tomorrow. And yesterday, you were nowhere near where you are today. And that's all we can expect.
Well, and I can also say that from previous experience, or from my own experience, besides self-awareness, mentorship certainly helps in self-regulation.
Oh yes.
Because if you've lost your temper inappropriately in a meeting, it's nice to have someone pull you aside afterwards and say, hey, don't do that again. We need to be aware of how it is that we're coming
and
from.
do it in such a way that you know the relationship is not harmed.
Correct.
That's what mentorship has great value in. It creates that safety net where we feel confidence that we can learn and grow.
Yeah. And I think all of these come social, so you can practice social skills in a team environment and have those learn to help you in this whole process. But I think what I'm coming back down to is we need to be able to continue to practice. You can't become self-aware if you're always worried about the schedule and the process and the techniques and all this. You have to also pay attention to you and your team and the attitudes and the emotions and how people are perceiving you. All of this comes together to help us improve our emotional intelligence.
Excellent.
Any final words from you on this?
I cannot say anything better.
We could, as I was preparing for this particular podcast, the deeper I got into it, the more I realized we could do a whole year on this and not even scratch the surface. There's so much here.
Yeah, and there are other topics we do need to explore too. So, where can we find you, Merv, out on the internet?
Well, the best place in terms of if you want to see some of my body of work is on my website, peoplefirstprojectmanagement.com, but also on LinkedIn. I think you and I have made a commitment to ourselves that we will advertise these podcasts in the upcoming podcast shows more frequently so that people will know where to find us. So LinkedIn, Merv Jersak is a great place to find me.
And the same with me, Tim Jerome, out on LinkedIn. There are other areas that I'm exploring and I'm developing, and you'll see them in the weeks and months to come. But for right now, LinkedIn is the best way to engage.
Well, great. So until next week's scintillating topic, Tim, I'm bidding you adieu and wishing you a great week ahead.
Thank you very much. And same to you. And thanks everyone who's tuned in here. If you have questions, send them in. If you have comments, send them in. And you may see us discussing those in future shows as well.
Great. Take it easy.
You too.